All right, kicking off another deep dive. And today we're going deep into something pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
It's the link between sex and the immune system and the brain.
Oh, wow.
You sent over this piece, a Korean scientific paper. The title translates to Brain, Immunity, and Sex, Interactions in Health and Disease. And
Catchy.
I know, right? And it's got some really eye-opening stuff. Have you ever noticed how some brain conditions, they seem to affect men and women, like, differently, right? At different points in their lives?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You see that pattern a lot.
Yeah, that's what we're going to explore.
Yeah. Like, for example, in early childhood, boys have a much higher chance of developing autism.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We're talking like 4 times more likely.
Wow.
And then as they get older, their risk for schizophrenia goes up too. Like 2 to 3 times higher than women.
That's a huge difference.
It is.
And it's not like girls just get off scot-free.
No, not at all.
They just have different vulnerabilities, right?
Right.
So, like, they're less prone to those conditions early on, but then puberty hits.
Right.
And it seems to be kind of a turning point.
Yeah.
They face a higher likelihood of depression and anxiety. And then much later in life, Alzheimer's, their risk goes way up.
Yeah.
So it's like different vulnerabilities at different times.
It is. It is. It's tempting to just kind of chalk it up to, like societal pressures or women just living longer.
Right.
But for years, neuroscience research was really biased towards male subjects, like assuming that whatever they learn would just apply equally to women.
Right. Just a default human brain.
Exactly. Exactly. But now we're finally starting to see just how different things can be.
Right.
And the immune system, in particular, seems to play a really unique role in shaping the male and the female brain.
Right.
Even before we're born.
And that's what I found so interesting about this paper.
Yeah.
It digs into these tiny brain cells called microglia.
Yeah.
Which are part of the immune system, but
Right.
they're not just fighting infections. They're actually sculpting the structure of our brains, especially during development.
It's really incredible, yeah.
So these microglia are like the brain's tiny architects.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Think of them as little gardeners
Okay.
pruning away the extra synapses.
Those connections between brain cells.
Exactly.
Wow.
And even getting rid of entire cells if they're not needed.
Wow.
It's like they're fine-tuning the brain's wiring, making sure everything's connected just right.
So our brains aren't just hardwired from day one.
Yep.
They're being actively shaped by these tiny immune cells.
That's right.
That's wild. But how does this all tie into the differences that we see between men and women?
Well, this is where things get really, really interesting.
Okay.
Research has shown that microglia, they actually behave differently in male and female brains, even when there's no infection present.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it all seems to come down to testosterone exposure in the womb.
Oh, wow. Okay. So even before we're born, testosterone is already influencing how our brains are going to develop.
It is.
By shaping the activity of these microglia.
Exactly.
That's wild. Do you have any real-world examples of how this plays out?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
One really fascinating one is rough and tumble play in rat pups.
Okay, yeah.
So there was this study back in 2019 by McCarthy and his team, and they were looking at how microglia and the amygdala, the part of the brain linked to emotions, how they were affected by testosterone.
Okay.
And they found that in the male pups, the testosterone actually made those microglia more active. And they ended up eliminating a specific type of cell that develops into astrocytes.
Astrocytes. Weren't those mentioned in the paper too?
Yeah.
I feel like I remember something about them having a calming effect on the brain.
You have a great memory.
Thanks.
Astrocytes do seem to play a role in dampening, nerve cell activity.
Yeah.
And in the female pups, because their microglia weren't as active, those astrocytes, they actually survived.
Oh. Well.
And likely contributed to their, less rambunctious play style.
Right.
And get this, when they blocked the microglia from doing their thing in the male pups, they were way less likely to, engage in rough and tumble play.
So it's like the testosterone in the males was pushing those microglia to actually trim back the calming influence of the astrocytes.
Exactly. It's really highlighting how even just basic behaviors can have roots in these early sex-specific differences in immune activity.
Wow.
And these differences can have long-term consequences for brain health.
That makes sense. The paper also talked about this 2020 study on mice.
Oh, yeah.
Where the mothers were exposed to something that mimics a viral infection during pregnancy.
Right.
What did they find there?
Well, this study I think is really fascinating because it sheds light on the potential link between these early immune challenges and conditions like schizophrenia. So in the male offspring, they saw an increased density of synapses.
Okay.
In the dentate gyrus.
In the what?
Dentate gyrus, which is a brain area involved in memory.
Okay. Now, I remember reading that people with schizophrenia often have a smaller dentate gyrus.
They do.
So could these extra synapses actually be a bad thing?
It's possible.
Okay.
Think of it like this. Synapses are the connections between brain cells, right?
Right.
So more synapses, more communication.
Right.
But too much communication could lead to problems, like an overloaded circuit.
Right. Okay.
And the study also mentioned that the female offspring, they showed a different pattern.
Okay.
With fewer excitatory synapses.
So both sexes were affected, but in completely different ways.
Exactly. And all because of something that happened while they were still in the womb.
It really underscores that whole priming hypothesis idea, right?
It does, yeah.
Where that early immune activation can kind of set the stage for these brain differences.
Like a domino effect.
Yeah.
Playing out over years.
Right. But we've mainly been focusing on how these early immune differences might be making boys more vulnerable. What about girls? How does their immune landscape differ?
That is an excellent question.
Especially after puberty.
Yeah, and it's something I think we should definitely dig into. So we've been talking about how boys might be more susceptible to, certain conditions early on because of those sex differences in how their microglia behave.
Yeah.
But then things kind of seem to shift around puberty when girls face a higher risk of things like, depression and anxiety.
Right, yeah.
And the immune system, it really does seem to be involved here too, but maybe in a different way.
Okay.
Women, generally speaking, they have a more robust immune response.
Oh, really?
Than men, yeah. And it's one reason they're more prone to autoimmune disorders.
Right, where the immune system attacks its own body, right?
Exactly. So it's like their immune system is stronger in a way.
Right.
But that strength might also have some downsides when it comes to the brain.
So it's like a trade-off almost.
Kind of, yeah. This heightened immune reactivity in women, it could actually be linked to mental health.
Okay.
Studies have shown distinct gene activity patterns in the brains of people with depression.
Okay.
And in women, those patterns often involve genes that are related to inflammation.
So it's not just that women are experiencing depression more often.
Right.
But the underlying biological stuff might actually be different.
Yeah, that's a really important point.
Okay.
It highlights the need for, personalized medicine.
Right.
A treatment that might work really well for depression in a man might not be as effective for a woman, and vice versa.
Makes you wonder how many other conditions might have these hidden sex differences that we haven't even really considered. Because we've just operated under this assumption that everyone's brain is basically the same.
Right, for the most part, yeah.
And now we're realizing that's just not true.
Yeah, it opens up a whole new frontier in understanding brain health.
Totally.
And it brings us to another condition where sex and immunity intersect, and that's Alzheimer's disease.
Right.
Remember we mentioned earlier how women are more likely to develop Alzheimer's?
Yeah.
Well, brain inflammation seems to be a key factor there as well.
Yeah, the paper talked about a study that looked at gene activity.
Yeah.
In the brains of people who had passed away with Alzheimer's, what did they find?
They found some really interesting differences between men and women.
Okay.
So in women with Alzheimer's,
Okay.
there were changes in the activity of genes that regulate immune responses. And those changes weren't seen in men with the disease.
Huh. So again, it's a different mechanism at play.
It seems like it, yeah.
What about microglia? Do they have any role in Alzheimer's?
It's a complicated picture, but there is some evidence that they might.
Okay.
Earlier, we were talking about how microglia could potentially increase risk, early in life.
Yeah.
Well, in aging male brains, they might actually offer some protection.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was one study
Okay.
that found that men's brains were more likely to have these amoeba-shaped microglia, which are thought to be involved in, protective activity.
So the same cells that might make you more vulnerable early on could actually be beneficial later in life.
It's possible, yeah.
That's fascinating.
It is.
What about just the increase in brain inflammation that we see as people age?
Right.
Does that affect men and women the same?
Not quite.
Right?
While both, male and female mice show an increase in brain inflammation with age, it's even more pronounced in females.
So it's like the female brain, it has to deal with this more reactive immune system throughout life.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, it has this sharper increase in inflammation with age.
Right. It's like a double whammy.
No wonder their risk for Alzheimer's is higher.
It makes you wonder, why would these differences even exist in the first place?
Yeah, well, the paper suggested that pregnancy might actually be a driving force.
Oh, interesting.
Behind these evolutionary differences.
Mm.
And it makes sense if you think about it. Pregnancy is this, 9-month balancing act for the immune system.
It is.
The mother's body has to tolerate the fetus.
Which is basically, foreign, right?
Yeah, it's genetically different.
Yeah.
Without rejecting it.
It's remarkable.
Yeah, so that tolerance requires her immune system to be super flexible.
It does.
Suppressing some responses, but then still fighting off infection.
Right.
It's a lot.
It really is an amazing feat.
But that flexibility, it might come at a cost.
Potentially, yeah.
Maybe increasing the female brain's vulnerability to certain conditions.
That's the current thinking, yeah.
So it's like this evolutionary adaptation that helps the survival of the species.
Mm.
But it might leave women more susceptible to these brain-related challenges.
It's a trade-off.
Yeah, and then men, they just don't have that same evolutionary pressure. So their immune responses stay pretty stable throughout life.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's incredible how intertwined all of this is.
It is.
But now that we're starting to actually understand these differences, what does that mean for the future of, treating brain conditions? Are we talking about, creating different treatments for men and women?
Not necessarily. It's not about, having separate treatments for each sex.
Okay.
But more about understanding how those differences might influence someone's response to a treatment. Imagine, in the future, we can analyze someone's immune profile.
Right.
And tailor their treatment based on that information.
Okay, so instead of this, one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly.
We're moving toward this personalized medicine.
That's right.
Where treatments are really individualized based on, your sex, your immune system activity, all that.
Exactly. It's about understanding the individual, not just the disease. And that's really where this research is taking us.
That's exciting.
It is.
Imagine being able to predict someone's risk for certain conditions, way earlier, and then intervene with these personalized strategies to reduce their risk.
I agree. It's super exciting.
It could revolutionize how we approach brain health throughout life.
I think so, yeah.
And it's important to remember that understanding these differences is also crucial for achieving health equity.
Absolutely.
We want to make sure that everyone has access to the most effective treatments.
Right.
No matter their sex.
Exactly.
This research is a big step in that direction.
For sure.
This has been so thought-provoking.
It has, hasn't it?
We've covered so much, from those tiny microglia shaping our brains, to those evolutionary pressures on the immune system, to the potential of personalized medicine. It's clear we're just scratching the surface.
We are. It's a really exciting time to be involved in this research.
It is. With every new discovery, we're getting this deeper understanding of the brain and how complex it really is.
It's remarkable.
And to our listener, thank you for sharing this paper with us. It has led to such a fascinating discussion.
I agree.
We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive as much as we have. It's pretty amazing to think that something like pregnancy, something that's been happening for millions of years, could have such a big impact on how the brain and immune system evolved. It makes you wonder if there are other things, other evolutionary pressures that we haven't even thought about yet.
Oh, there are. There are definitely a lot more factors involved. The paper mentioned, just briefly, that microglia in men's brains might actually get more protective as they age.
Oh, really?
Yeah, maybe counteracting some of that age-related inflammation we talked about. It's definitely an area that needs a lot more research.
So it's possible that those early vulnerabilities that we see in the male brain might be balanced out later on in life.
It's possible.
By these protective microglia. That's fascinating. Yeah.
It is.
But if these sex differences are so deeply rooted in our biology, what does that mean for, how we treat brain-related conditions? Are we going to have to develop completely different treatments for men and women?
Not necessarily. It's not really about, making separate treatments for each sex.
Okay.
But more about understanding how these sex differences might influence how well a treatment works for someone.
Right. So you could have the same medication,
right,
but a woman might respond to it differently than a man.
Exactly. Exactly. Imagine in the future we can analyze someone's immune profile and then use that to figure out, like, the best treatment for them.
Oh, so instead of that one-size-fits-all approach, we're moving more towards personalized medicine.
Right, where treatments are really tailored to each person.
Based on things like their sex and how their immune system works.
Exactly. It's about looking at the whole picture, not just the disease.
I like that, yeah. That's exciting, like being able to predict someone's risk for certain conditions way earlier on. And intervene with these personalized strategies. It could really, like, change how we think about brain health across someone's entire lifespan.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that this is also crucial for achieving health equity.
Right. Making sure everyone has access to the best treatments possible.
Yeah.
No matter their sex.
Absolutely. This research is a huge step in that direction.
It really is. This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive. We've learned so much, from those tiny microglia that are shaping our brains, to those evolutionary pressures that shape our immune system, to the future of personalized medicine. It's clear that we're really just starting to understand this whole area.
It's a fascinating field for sure.
And to our listener, thanks for sharing this incredible paper with us.
Yeah, thank you.
It's really sparked such a fascinating conversation. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive as much as we have. And until next time, keep those brains buzzing.